When you discover the importance of foot health, foot strength, basically what your feet do to your body and what happens if you don't let your feet do their job, it can really change your life for the better. But if you're a professional, it can mess you up. And we're going to find out more about that in just a few moments on this episode of the Movement, the podcast for people who want to know the truth about what it takes to have a happy, healthy, strong body. Starting feet first, those things at the end of your legs that are your foundation. We also break down the propaganda, the mythology, and sometimes the flat out lies you've been told about what it takes to run or walk or play or do yoga or CrossFit, whatever you like to do, and to do those things enjoyably and effectively and efficiently. Did I say enjoyably? It's a trick question. I did. Because if you're not having a good time, you're not going to keep up whatever it is you're doing anyway. So make sure you're having fun. And that's what we're here to do. I'm Stephen Sashen from zeroshoes.com. I'm now the Chief Barefoot Officer. That's my new title. I'm not going to talk about that though. And we call this the movement because we're creating a movement. More about that in a second about natural movement, letting your body do what it's made to do and not getting in the way and interfering, even though we sometimes think that modern technology is better than just what human beings have been doing since the beginning of human beings. Not always the case. To make this move, it's really simple. You can help. You don't have to do anything special. It's just what you already know how to do. Go check out our website, www.jointhemovement.com. Nothing you need to do to join, but that's where you will find out previous episodes. You'll find those. You'll find out how you can subscribe to hear about upcoming episodes. You will find all the different places you can get the podcast if you're not getting it at your favorite podcaster whatever thing now. And the gist is, when you can, give us a thumbs up, give us a 5-star review, share this with your friends. In short, if you want to be part of the tribe, just subscribe. All right. That's all the intro stuff. Let us have some fun. Hey, Greg, do me a favor. Tell people who you are and what you're doing here.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Greg Stern. I am the owner of From the Ground Up Physiotherapy, and you actually stole my title a little bit. I'm the CFO, the Chief Foot Officer here in Montreal. That's it. And I help people get to the root cause of their pain so that they can get back to doing the things they love. So this all started with my own personal story, as I feel like it does for so many. And as you were mentioning, this idea of navigation through professional pursuits. I'm 30 years old right now, but 10 years ago, I had a very innocent ankle sprain playing flag football that decided not to heal properly. Up to that point, I had lots and lots of acute injuries. I was the rambunctious kid, always getting into trouble, climbing up trees, breaking my nose, breaking my foot, always getting into trouble. But those injuries always seemed to get better. Unfortunately, or fortunately, as we could discuss how injuries could happen for you if you decide to view them that way, I ended up spraining my ankle and it just never heals properly. So I was dealing with chronic pain for about 5 years in my foot. 2.5 years into that journey, I ended up getting surgery. Actually, I had an accessory navicular, so like there was an extra piece of bone, but essentially through that process, my father's an emergency physician and my mom is a physical therapist herself. They had suggested I go to see physio. So I went from one physio to the next, doing all the things, being super diligent with the homework they were giving me, and nothing was really working. So I was pretty depressed at that point because I couldn't do the things I love to do anymore. Every time I would try a bout of activity, my whole body would ache. My feet were crying for help. And it was a long journey. Like I could fast forward the whole thing, but
No, don't. I want to hear some of the other interventions that you attempted. And of course, I'll prompt you for what can follow that is having two parents who are medical people. I can only guess that as you got to what will be the end of that journey and the beginning of a new journey, they had some opinions.
oh yeah,
So
100%. Yes. I was thinking my whole life that I would be a doctor. I think that was like I'm super interested in the body and in sciences overall. And I studied health science through CJEP, which is actually pre-college here in Quebec in Montreal. And I was thinking about going to medicine. I had done volunteering opportunities, but I was always super into fitness as well. And my decision to say, oh, actually, I want to go into physiotherapy was met with a no. I don't know, what do you mean no? And it was a very tough navigation because at that point, all I could think about was getting out of pain. And no longer did medicine attract me because I'm pinging with pain 24/7. And it wasn't a pain that was horrible, but it was constant the moment I woke up and to the moment I would go to bed. This buzzing reminder of this nagging injury that just didn't want to get better. And I had to stand on my own 2 feet. I'm like, no, this is what I'm doing. And unfortunately, now, 10 years later, as I own my own clinic, it's met with I'm
We'll get there. We'll get there. So backing up a half a step. So during that time, and let's just do this one before you found an obvious solution, because we know where the story is going. What were some of the other interventions that you tried that were ineffectual?
typically, as many people will have encountered, site of pain equals site of problem, the way that most physios and chiros and osteos think about the body. So it was just like a lot of hands-on therapy to the calf, to the foot, mobilization, the banded elastic drills, calf raises, calf stretching, towel curls, all these things that don't really cut it. And then when they don't cut it, orthotics. Then I was in big orthopedic shoes, walking around with these heavy cushioned shoes. And that was the main things that I was given, depending, no matter the professional I was going to. And when that wasn't starting to work, I was already starting to look at surgical options, and they were looking at CT scans and MRIs and looking at what was the problem. And what they saw was there was like micro motion of the tendon pulling on the bone that wasn't like a solid connection. Now, I can't say for sure whether, like, now, given the knowledge I have, whether or not I could have helped it versus back then it was just what needed to happen. But essentially, the moment I woke up after surgery, I thought all my problems would be over. And then as I start walking on my body, hello hip pain, hello back pain. And now I'm even more broken down than before and more depressed than before. And it was obviously super challenging at that point to know what direction is next, because I just got the surgery and thought that would be the solution to my problem. And I ended up getting a athletic therapist that started training me more and started connecting my body a bit more. And that helped. But again, I think it was the transition, I would say. I also then tried to transition to natural footwear too fast and aggressively, and that just further exacerbated. So I had to really hit a real rock bottom before I could start making my way back out.
So then that rock bottom, what we're going to get to the part where obviously you had what's the word, a road to Damascus moment. So what led to that and what was that? And then of course, what followed that?
Perhaps the company, the Foot Collective, they're a big like
Oh, sure.
education company. Yeah, so I'm quite friendly with the guys there. I actually gave a physiotherapy workshop to a bunch of the therapists there 2 weekends ago in Ottawa, which is very cool because that was the origins of my stories. Like, they were the first ones I started to hear talking about it. And one of the physios there had recommended I go into shoes, but actually midway through my physiotherapy degree, I actually took a year off. And because my family's ties to real estate, I ended up going into real estate for a year, just thinking, because during my time in physio, what I was being met with is mentors that were just saying, hands-on therapy is the key to everything. And I was like, did I just sign up for this? This is not what like I thought physiotherapy could be. I had been following Kelly Starrett back in the day, and I was very like, all right, like physiotherapy is all about giving personal responsibility to your clients, but that's not what I was being met with in my schooling. It was really this isolated approach that was super tunnel visioned and so focused on hands-on and not movement. And I got this opportunity. And while in New York City living there, I was decided I go to Vivo barefoot shoes at the time, and walking on concrete like that with a shoe that a foot was already like half dead because it wasn't working properly. I gave myself double plantar fasciitis in the process. So it was quite a down moment. But what really started getting me out of that actually was a podcast from this guy named Dr. Chatterjee, who introduced Gary Ward from Anatomy in Motion. I'm not sure if you've heard of him before,
Yeah.
but he was all into pronation, which I had been trying to avoid for years. And the concept, I don't have to perhaps educate you, but obviously your audience may or may not be familiar, but foot flattening is the key to a happy foot. The idea that our feet are meant to be trampolines that spread out, absorb impact. And when I started to teach my foot to flatten, that was when my feet started to respond, and I could start to utilize my feet connected to my calf, connected to my knee, my hip, and to start to teach all the parts to work together. And then I just got more obsessed, diving down more rabbit holes and just spending all my time like in my basement, just like doing slow movements. And like the university degree, honestly, was just self-exploration of the different continuing education that was available for me to explore.
First of all, brilliant. Secondly, I want to highlight this because I like it, and I wish I had my foot skeleton with me.
Oh,
We
I've
moved,
got one. Here we
well,
are.
yeah, we moved into a new office and it disappeared.
Yeah.
But you can show for people who are watching, you can
Yeah.
show. So let's back up or do a little mild tangent. Pronation is not, it's not that pronation has gotten a bad rap. It's that pronation has been given a rap to at all. And it really came from, from what I can see, when what are now the big shoe companies made an elevated heel shoe where you end up landing on your heel, and your heel's a ball. By the time your foot comes down, it's unstable. And they came to this conclusion, oh my gosh, now we need motion control because your foot's unstable. Not having the idea, oh, we made your foot unstable. And so this idea that pronation is bad came from that, and it's become pervasive. Everyone thinks pronation is a horrible thing. My favorite thing is there's a footwear guy, gosh, it's so embarrassing. I'm really bad with names in general, and this guy's name always falls out of my head. So it'll pop into my brain within 5 minutes. Anyway, big deal foot dude. Let's just leave it at that for now, who was Mr. Anti-Pronation until a number of years ago when he completely made a 180 and everyone said, why have you changed your mind? He goes, the research. The research shows there's no correlation between pronation and any injury. And more, the things that are supposed to stop pronation rarely do because of the amount of force you're putting into the ground and what they're using to control that. Or if they do, they're creating other problems by immobilizing your foot. Anyway, that's my rant about that. But if you show on your little foot skeleton what happens when a foot contacts the ground, because just when you said that the foot flattens, to be clear, it's not like it necessarily completely does that, although it can because you'll never have that much ankle flexion.
Yeah.
But regardless, you do have this arch thing in your foot that under load, when it starts to flatten, actually gets stronger and utilizes the muscles, ligaments, and tendons as natural springs and shock absorbers and
Yeah.
sends messages. I'm just saying what you would say if I didn't shut up. But it
No, no,
also,
no.
but you're doing the visual part. I'm doing the audio part.
Mhm.
I don't know why. It also is sending messages once your foot is engaged that way up the chain to tell the rest of your body, your ankle, your knee, your hip, etc., how to function properly. Now, was that a good paraphrasing of what you discovered?
Yeah, 100%. I think the definition is very like pronation equals 3 points of contact on the floor. The thing is, when most people think of a foot collapsing or pronation, they think of collapse,
Yeah.
i.e., the pinky toe knuckle is lost. And that's no longer the definition of pronation is if the outside edge is lost. So I teach a lot of drills of how to pronate. So I get the hip to open up, I get the foot to flatten, but I put a wedge underneath all the tripod of the foot. And if I could steal a wedge away, and it's usually the outside part of the foot, therefore they are going too fast, too soon into the inside edge of the foot. And if they could delay that and learn to get the outer foot in contact as the arch goes down, then beautiful thing happens. And they do 5, 6 reps and they walk off. And I say, so how does it feel? Like, wow, like my foot feels light. It feels springy. It's almost like a comedy skit for me whenever I teach someone how to pronate their foot, like what their body responds to. Because it's very cool because for someone who has very high arch feet, they're like, I feel the ground more. I'm like, let's ask you a question. Would you rather have more of your foot on the ground or less of your foot on the ground? Like, obviously, more of the sense of like groundedness and connection. For people that actually have flat feet, it feels like their arch just got higher because when you stretch a muscle that's already stretched, it actually responds by coiling back to the middle. So it's very interesting depending on the person and depending on like their patterns, they'll just gain new awareness of parts of their feet that they never knew existed. So what everyone demonizes as so bad is actually what creates so much beauty in the foot and the rehab process.
Yeah, many people have never watched slow motion video of a number of, especially Kenyan marathoners,
Yeah.
who they pronate the inside ankle bone, just to say it without having to get technical for people, can sometimes be practically touching the ground. And people say, oh, they need to correct that. So, no, that's what's making them run fast.
Yeah.
But you highlighted the key difference. The key thing, and I originally learned this from Dr. Bill Sands when he had a lab out in Colorado, and he used to be at the US Olympic Committee. And he says it's not pronation, it's hyperpronation. It's happening too fast and out of control. And out of control is a combination of just how things are lining up and whatever strength you have. But that's the part that isn't really called out or delineated. Everyone goes, oh, pronation. And then it's a conversation stopper. But I love this idea that you have. If you're having something under the foot, to give people that feedback of, is this working or not?
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing that changes movement patterns. is having your brain go, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
realize that.
And now just rep it out and give that brain some new, just flood the brain with new feedback. And then also, obviously, tissue load is going to be different as well, because
Yeah.
what everyone is always focused on is straight knee movements. I'm obsessed with the idea of stacking someone's body. So you ask anyone to get into a split stance and say, bend your front knee, what typically happens for most people is that the ribs almost go back and they end up loading their lower back. So what
Huh.
we want to do is get someone into a position where they're like, leaned and loaded forward. And the moment that they do that, one, their back is happy. It's funny. I say, to me, the soleus is the most important muscle in the human body. The ability to get the rib cage and the head stacked on top of the middle of the foot. The midfoot is the key to unlocking everything. And once your calf kicks on, your back is safe. So when it comes to picking something up, everyone says bend your knees to pick something up. So they do that on the start of the movement. But the moment they actually stand up from picking things up, their knee prematurely extends backwards and then they finish through the lower back. And if they can maintain that knee forward for a little bit longer than the hip does the work, their calves get torqued. So people always complain about, oh my God, my calves like crazy are working super hard. But typically speaking, when you go to therapy settings, it's much more just straight calf raises, which is more the propulsive phase, but that's not what people struggle with. It's more that mid stance, their body coming over the top of their foot and loading into that midfoot, and pronating is what people are missing.
And some of that comes from the thing that people have heard until Ben Patrick, who is now known as the knees over toes guy, decided to start correcting this, which is if you are going to be in a split stance, one foot in front of the other, and you're going to do something squatting down or something lunge-ish, people think they're supposed to be upright and their knee isn't supposed to get in front of their toe, which means you're now I have to say I have a personal connection to this because 2 days ago was when I had my leg day. And my leg day workout was my front foot when I do the split stance is elevated. So it's up like maybe 3 inches. And my back foot is on a little wheelie thing so that I can't actually use my back foot. So if I do a lunge, basically it's a reverse lunge with my
Yeah.
back foot going behind me.
Mhm.
There's nothing I can do to support myself because it's on wheels. And when I do this, I'm leaning really far forward, keeping my back straight like you described. My knee is going as far as it needs to go. And I was just thinking this morning as I was walking my dog, holy crap, my hamstrings are torched. And my butt too. And my back feels fine, which is good because I got a broken spine. Put it all together, people have this as close to upside down as they possibly could, which just blows my mind. And oh, and it was even worse when I did that workout. So it was one set of those. It was like I'm holding like 30 pounds, but I did like a minute's worth, and I'm going all the way down as far as you
Yeah.
possibly can. And then my rest period was 10 seconds of being at the bottom and just bouncing a little bit.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I
and
love to do
did
those
that,
things.
3 times, and then I wanted to die and switch legs. So anyway, now people can steal my workout and curse me for it afterwards. So this is all brilliant. I need to back up a little bit. You had this discovery, you started using your foot. What was I want to do, what led you to then how you started changing your practice? And this is an appropriate time to tell people what the name of your practice is.
Yeah. So I'm shameful. I'm not even rocking
You're
it
you're
here
not
over
branding.
here, but here from the ground up physiotherapy. So I got a foot of my logo over here. So all obviously everything stems from our foundation, and it's very obvious to you and your audience. But unfortunately, most people don't even think about their feet as their foundation. It's just
Yeah.
this piece of meat that goes inside their shoes, and they forget about them until the pain starts coming on, and then
Yeah.
they start caring about it. And then the solutions, as we know, are very much pacified solutions that don't empower the foot to actually work properly.
Yeah.
So,
It's a vicious cycle.
yes, exactly. And so that vicious cycle for me is eventually I started going away and my feet started working a little bit better. And I think sometimes it's very appropriate though for people to transition to some sort of mid ground where there is a bit more cushioning. And I think that would have been a better solution for me from the standpoint of, especially it depends on the context of the ground that you're walking on. New York
Maybe.
City, unforgiving, thump, like to me, that was helpful. I ended up going into the Ultra brand before, end up
Right.
going into more Zero Vivo style.
I'm gonna argue that point just for the following reason. So Irene Davis, who's now the president of the American College of Sports Medicine, she was at Harvard. Now she's at the University of Southern Florida. Yes, I think that's it. And her research basically shows that almost any amount of cushioning, the problem is it cuts back down the amount of feedback that your brain is getting from your feet enough that it doesn't really, you're not getting the feedback that would inspire a change in your gait pattern. And my experience has been that going to something lower with a little extra cushioning,
Mm.
it doesn't really do anything. I just watch people doing the same thing, overstriding, heel striking,
All
etc.
right.
So in my world, which is called my brain, it's just start really small. Actually, I'll say it a little differently. The challenge is that I think what the delimiting factor is not the surface that you're on, but your natural propensity to learn new movement patterns based on feedback. And everyone's a little different that way. Some people, they literally can't feel what's going on, and that's a problem. And there's things that you can do to correct that, like just walking on mildly unpleasant surfaces barefoot
Yeah.
and just waking up the nervous system again. Or some people, they think they're doing one thing and they're doing something else, and they just need some video feedback to go, yeah, you're not doing what you think. And then the third group, they just need a couple of cues. And then the fourth group, they're naturals, and you just need to slow them down because they're going to have too
Yeah.
much fun and do too much too soon. So my contention is that if you're going to start with something other than a shoe, a quote barefoot shoe, is
Mhm.
literally barefoot, but just around the house, go to
Yeah.
get the mail, down the block and back, something really simple, because that's going to do more for gait retraining than anything else and getting you aware of what's going on.
I agree. I think one thing that is super helpful is during the transition process to be doing certain exercises in tandem with that. And again, those have to be done specifically. Again, I've gotten 85-year-olds into minimalist shoes, and I think it's just a matter of helping that transition
Yeah.
with additional things that will do the gait retraining as we're discussing.
You read my mind because I was going to say you've already hinted at some things that you do with people about
Mhm.
experiencing proper pronation and how
Yeah.
they can feel that. So for the people who are listening slash watching, toss out something they can do that's either a diagnostic thing or one of those exercises you would recommend if someone is in the process of making that transition or thinking about it even.
I think a very important thing is like a classic knee to wall test just to see how it feels left versus and what's the quality of that movement. Because when people just go for knee to wall, they
Well,
think that they
pause
go
there
ahead.
and describe the test because most people
Yeah,
don't.
so essentially you're gonna stand relatively close to a wall, and I just with the back leg very light, you're going to push your front knee forward with a heavy heel so that you are testing how far your knee could pass over your front foot. So the back leg, I really don't want it to exist. So you can put your hands on the wall. You're basically stretching out your calf. Now,
Okay.
what is the quality of that movement and where does your knee tend to go? Because people have been ingrained that when they do that, they should push their knee outside so that the arch doesn't go down. So oftentimes people experiencing pinching in the front of their ankle there, as opposed to lengthening of their calf. So just learning that when you do that, you want to maintain your big toe knuckle, your little toe knuckle, and your heel and driving your knee forward. And then what does that feel like for you? Does that feel like a calf stretch or are you feeling pinching? Because if you are feeling pinching, then you're not getting any sort of arch relaxation that we're talking about. And then obviously we could either link, I could send over some videos that
Yeah, that'll
to
be
show
great.
the audience because
Yeah, we'll
that's
put those in.
something huge that I teach to my clients every day.
Yeah, we'll put those in
Um,
the show notes.
and then also just learning to stack the body in a way where you bend your front knee, hands on your belly, and you shift your weight forward to the point where your toe knuckles just slam into the ground in a sense that they're going to all of a sudden feel very firm and your calf kicks on, your quad kicks on, and your butt kicks on just by virtue of you being stacked. And that's like the foundation of how I teach all my movements. Once you're stacked, then we could do 3D movements. Then we could do a chop. Then we could pronate. Then we could side bend and rotate and squat, learning to get the calf involved in almost every single movement. Obviously, it's a bit more challenging to explain certain things, but learning to just jump in a way that where you, when you jump from your right foot to your left foot, you're able to land in a stacked position and then freeze on a dime. And then you do that back and forth because that's what we almost slow down the process of running where you could stand, land in a stacked position in a freeze position where your knee doesn't budge. Because a lot of people, when they run, they've been told land softly. And by landing softly, they end up sinking and using much more of a muscular strategy. And we want to learn to be a lot more rigid and elastic when we run rather than running in a trotting kind of way where, the body like loses height on each step.
There's so many things in there that you said that I totally love. So first of all, I want to highlight that when many people talk about stacking things, they literally do mean just one straight above the other. And you're talking about something very different. You're talking about a different kind of alignment that's engaged. So again, your knee is moving a little forward. You're leaning slightly forward from the hip.
Yeah.
If you look from the foot to the knee to the hip to your body.
Yep.
It's kind
Yes.
of not quite Z-shaped. I'm trying to draw
Mhm.
that.
I see just as you're doing, that's exactly how I picture it.
Yeah. And then this whole idea about jumping from foot to foot in a way as a simulation of running, I love because running is just jumping from foot to foot.
Yeah.
And my favorite thing about that idea of having someone just jump from foot to foot, and you don't have to jump really far left or
Not at all.
um, just do it at all.
Yeah.
Because what people will find naturally, they're not going to be landing on their fucking heel. And so that's the first thing. And I tried to say it without the F word, but I couldn't. It's mind blowing. If you ask someone I've been meaning to do this. I'm trying to find a phone book because they don't have them anymore. So it's good, like Atlanta phone book, like 3 inches high, and have someone just step off of that and you watch, actually step off and immediately jump. And you watch, they land on the ball of their foot
Yeah.
and they use their body properly. So that's how you're supposed to run. People go, but that's not what I've been told. Yeah, by big companies who made shoes that make you land on your
Yeah.
heel, that mess
Yeah.
you up. So I love just that whole idea. And most importantly, this notion that yeah, this land softly and also run upright instead of having this little bit of lean
Yeah.
forward from the ankles. These are just the wrong cues. And what you said, and it's my favorite thing, when you're running, you want to be a taut spring.
Yeah.
This is a fun aside. When Usain Bolt went from being a 400-meter runner to a 100-meter runner, the big thing that his coach Glenn Mills had him do for a year was a lot of core strengthening stuff, not just abs, but lower back as well, because he was loose. He was not a taut spring. And being a taut spring was part of, I'm not going to say entirely, there may be some other things that led to running a 9:58, but
Mhm.
regardless, put that all together, and that's what made him the fastest man in the world.
So on that topic, I'm not sure if you're familiar with David Weck and Bosu
Uh,
ball.
would you like me to show you the most recent text I got from David?
Yeah,
Um,
so David is my pal. I've hung out
yeah,
with him a couple of times in San Diego, and obviously his whole system is let's just take out all the slack in the system and getting to these coiling core positions. So I
yeah.
really got into WEC method stuff in the last 2 years. So for those that are not familiar, the idea again of when we think about running, often people think of like, all right, don't cross midline, don't
Just
let
be
the head
rigid. Yeah.
move really, and just be a bit more rigid. And you end up seeing these very robotic movements. But if you actually look at the animals and you look at the fastest human beings in the world, there's the concept obviously of head over foot. And so the idea of a side bend and a rotation while maintaining like the body going forward in space, what we're going to see is that we're going to perfectly align our entire structure. We already talked about it from like the side view standpoint of like, all right, can we get that nice Z-shaped looking thing where the body's stacked over the midfoot, but can we also get the spine to start side bending and rotating and taking advantage of the spinal engine movement or figure of eight pattern? And that's led to me like a massive push towards teaching people rope flow. I don't know if you've ever dabbled around with that, but that is literally combining the principles of WEC method with what I'm teaching from a stack standpoint combined together to provide like the best experience for my clients.
Two things. A, I'm going to have you describe rope flow for people who
Yeah.
don't know it. But B, my only argument with David about what you just described is, pardon me, is that when you're watching sprinters, it's a bit of a fake out because one of the reasons sprinters are exhibiting that kind of head over foot thing a little to a certain extent is frankly because their legs have gotten so big that their stance, one foot to the other, it's like a good foot apart sometimes. And so they
Mhm.
are literally bouncing left and right as they go down the track. If you are, if frankly, if you don't have that much volume in your upper thighs, then you're not going to have that same kind of back and forth. And for sprinters in particular, the goal is to really have everything be forward because you're only on the ground for 8/100ths of a
Well, I
second.
guess there's going to be this slight
There's
deviation.
there's
Of
a
course, it's
very
not.
slight head
Yeah, yeah.
thing simply because especially if you watch a lot of these guys in the start, they're really going left to right in part because they want to have they want their legs to cycle faster during the first few steps.
Mhm.
And it's easier to do that if your legs are spread further apart than if they're more aligned. So sprinting, and I only bring it up because I'm a sprinter, of course, and it's all about me, is that sprinting is a different animal. And you're doing this weird thing for a very specific reason to get from here to there in a straight line
Yeah.
crazy fast. So it doesn't really count, frankly, but I like to bring it up for the fun of it.
Yeah, fair enough. Just from the standpoint of just for the casual jogger to just include
Yeah.
different inputs, because like I can mess around with. So coming back to rope flow for a second, basically instead of jumping through a rope, you have a bit of, I have it over here, just like a weighted rope that's not too weighted. It's just a little bit more feedback as we've talked about. And essentially, instead of jumping through it, I create figure-of-8 patterns where I'm keeping my hands close to my midline, but I'm learning to get this idea of a side bend and a rotation where one shoulder is going to be slightly lower than the other. And I'm going to tap into this rib. I'm going to lengthen my obliques, and then I'm going to pop to the next one. And so underhand pattern, if the rope is swinging like away from you, is more about a gait pattern. If I go overhand, then it starts to look more fighting or kayaking. And you could just mess around with as you're running. If you just want to be casual with it, you notice that the more you get the upper body fluid and moving, again, you don't have to exaggerate, but you could like just have fun with the way that you're running. You'll notice that you end up landing more in balance. Like when I do that leaping drill that we talked about a few minutes ago, about just like people just landing, if their head stays inside when you take one leg off the floor, you're more likely to topple over. So naturally, if I'm standing here and I take one leg off, my center mass needs to shift over to be more stacked over here. So that's this idea of the head over foot, and this adding in a bit of this arm movement creates this more fluid motion when you're running instead of those that keep their arms stiff. And so a lot of people end up running like with elbows and hands as opposed to the shoulder blades moving fluidly. And that's what I tend to find with a lot of shoulder pain patients in
Yep.
general, is that they just move through their humerus bone, their arm bone, instead of allowing the scapula, the shoulder blades, to move fluidly on their rib cage. And the moment I teach them how to do that, their shoulder pain goes away.
And this is backing up to sprinting. This is an interesting thing because for proper sprinting, there is this upper body thing happening
Yeah.
because for as much as your legs are doing the heavy lifting, if you will, for your leg to come out in front of you properly, because sprinting is all about what's referred to as front side mechanics
Yeah.
more than anything else, your opposite arm has to be able to go back behind you. Now you're trying to keep the amount of motion in your arms contained because the more your arms move, the slower your leg, the more range of motion your arms have, the longer it takes for them to move through a
Yeah.
cycle, and your legs will then follow. So there's this interesting balance where the upper body is still doing this. It's not a figure 8 per se, but it is doing this oscillating
Yeah.
motion. It's not staying rigid and straight like with a bunch of
Yeah.
runners because that's the only way to do it. And this also relates to our friend Danny Dreyer from Chi Running, where the idea being that if you are using your hips properly, also, it's the image that he used that he gave me years ago, I think before he even created Chi Running, is if you imagine putting a shirt on a hanger and you just start twisting the hanger back and forth, you'll see there's a spot in the middle, like basically the middle of the back, that stays stable and things rotate above and below that in opposite directions. And it's like that's what your body does if you're running properly.
Mhm.
And David's just adding a little bit of an additional plane of movement possible.
Yeah, I guess the side bend is what a lot of people
Yeah.
tend to miss, right?
Yeah.
So like you hear idea, obviously always about rotational training, but rotation happens with the side bend as well. And I think with these principles, is give your brain the extremes so that when you do running, like you're not actually going as intensely as that, but if you could find the extremes, the brain kind of finds its center. And that's the whole idea of anatomy in motion as well. Is like, all right, with this respect to just like you're existing in such a small range of motion with your foot or with your hip, and the more you could flood your brain with extremes, it will find its center.
And this is an interesting thing because again, and I've done this with people if they're, especially if they're overstriding, I'll suggest that they do it more and exaggerate it because we do get into these
Hmm.
patterns. And once we've habituated a pattern, we don't know what we are or aren't doing. And
Yeah.
so and you can, and this, my first barefoot run was literally doing exactly what you described. I was entranced with the feeling of my feet on the ground. What can I do differently to see how this works? I want to see if this is for real or not, was actually what I was thinking. And so I would exaggerate things in both directions. I'd make my stride really long. I'd make my stride really short. I'd pick up my cadence without running any faster, or I'd run faster with a slower cadence. Anything I could think of,
Yeah.
just push the edges of how this movement pattern could work just to see what I discovered. And another thing I'll do with some people, I'll have them stand in front of me. We're facing each other, and I put my hands on their shoulders and have them lean into me. And I'll step way back until they're like at a 45-degree angle. And I go, okay, I'm going to run backwards, you run forward. And I put enough pressure that they have to be at that angle just to
Wow.
see
That's
what it's
cool.
like to have your feet behind you when you're running, which is a massive exaggeration. But that's like the only way to wake up your brain, it
Yeah.
seems.
It's exactly the same thing as that stack that we're talking about. I had a client say to me, I always have back pain, but he said, when I drag my dead deer after hunting, I don't have back pain. I don't understand because it's behind him. And so therefore he has to lean forward and all of a sudden his posterior chain kicks on. So just getting, or it's actually still snowing in Montreal. Yesterday it was beautiful and now it's snowing again. Yes, it's April, the end of April.
Oh, if it makes you feel any better, we had 6 inches of snow on Saturday. On Sunday, it was 65 degrees.
Yeah, it's wild. So it's the same thing, this volatile. But anyway, I digress. It's more about, okay, I always tell people if your car is stuck in the snow and you got to push it, what are you going to do? You're going to stand upright with your rib cage back, or you're going to learn to lean forward. And so as soon as so much of it, when it comes back to the rehab world, we think about individual muscles instead of just what is your center of mass doing? And if we could just arrange your center mass slightly differently,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
of a sudden the whole chain will start working. But we're so hyper obsessed about, to be honest, like the tibants or this, that, like everyone's find their new favorite muscle of the day. But it's like, all right, let's just learn to organize your body a little bit better. And everything starts to work in unison. And we don't have to overthink about each like a fiber of our being.
It's so funny you say this. I was thinking about this a lot in the last few days. Do you know the writer David Sedaris?
I do not.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Anyway, he American guy, but he's been living in Paris and
Okay.
or in France. I'm not sure if he's in Paris. And he commented on a talk show that I saw him on recently that his French friends accuse him of walking like an American. And he said, "What is that?" And they said, "You throw your legs in front of you." Now,
Uh-huh.
if you're wearing a shoe with an elevated heel and it tips you forward, tips your center of mass
Yep.
forward, and you adjust by leaning back
Mhm.
somewhere to be more upright, you can't actually extend your leg behind you. You can't actually get hip extension. So you have to throw your leg forward. So if you put your feet flat on the ground, I realized the only thing you need to do to learn to put your foot or to use your leg properly is lean forward a tiny bit
Yep.
from your ankles, like an inch or two. And it'll
Yep.
feel a little bit like you're falling forward because you are. And
Mhm.
if you do it just a little bit, that little bit of falling is going to trigger all the right movement patterns. And there's more to it than that. You can do things of working on the hip
Totally.
extension, but
Yep.
even with the hip extension, the thing that's making it work is that tiny bit of moving your center of mass an inch or so in front of you while maintaining proper posture.
It's an interesting thing about proper posture because I always find the word posture a
Oh,
dirty word,
it's
and I want
yeah. As I was saying it, I didn't like it, but that's
that's
okay.
okay. It's okay. But it is interesting because one of the things I do teach to my clients, I actually teach my clients often how to slouch. Let me go into that for a second here because when we hear the words posture, immediately you just start seeing someone puff
Yeah.
their chest up and squeeze their shoulders back, right? Like in what mom and dad and society think about this aesthetically pleasing posture. But you'll notice, like what I'll often cue people to do. So if everyone's listening to this right now, basically you squeeze your hands together really, really hard. Yeah, and we squeeze and we squeeze and we squeeze. And now I ask you, if I asked you to do that for the next 12 hours, would your hands be happy? And I don't think so.
No, because I wouldn't be able to eat.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, when people think about posture, they often extend from their lower back. And so they're really just cranking away into that low back. And if we look at people in India or China or Africa, like most people that are 80 years old, I visited 10 years ago in India, are very happy to be in a deep squat position. But you'll notice the spine in that position is much more relaxed and rounded. But then all of a sudden we sit in a chair, we think we need to be here. There's nothing wrong with sitting and sighing and allowing the ribs to come down, the shoulders to be more forward, because being more relaxed while you're sitting is there's nothing inherently wrong. If I listen in and I'm intense about this conversation, I can lean forward almost from my hip here, but I'm not cranking and almost falling back into my low back. And that's what happens with so many people, even when they're picking things up. Like if you think about a strong man picking up 300-pound stone, he has his back, he or she has his back in a full flex position. It's just their knee position stays forward as they pick it up and their hip extends. So whether the back is straight or rounded is not necessarily the key point. It's more about what's happening below in the hip, knee, and foot that I care more about. So I teach people how to actually do like a slouchy split squat where they keep their knee forward and all of a sudden their back feels great. and their leg starts convulsing. So every day in my clinic, I have people whose nervous system starts to shake like crazy because I'm putting their bodies in positions they haven't been in for years, and I'm forcing them to go into, eventually they could go back straight to whatever that means. But for the time being, I almost want to exaggerate, again, an extreme of using a spinal flexion strategy and then driving through their legs. And all of a sudden, amazing things start to happen because we're going away from what they're so habituated to use.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That inspires me to ask this. So we gave people the knee wall test. Is there anything else that you can think of that something that for people to experience if they're in a position where they could do that? Something just that would give them a little like, ooh, and a little more understanding of what you're doing if somebody walked into your clinic, basically.
Yeah, I think one of the first drills that I show someone is basically instead of a classic glute bridge, I'm going to put their feet on a foam roller, but with the midfoot and forefoot on while they spike their heels or lift their heels. And key being is that when they're in that glute bridge position, most people push through their heels and really lift through their lower back. And when they're doing that, they're basically using their lower backs to lift them up. But instead of doing that, I put the foam roller under the fronts of their feet and they lift up their heels. And now I say, drive up through your feet, but lift up like a millimeter off the ground. And all of a sudden, they're going to feel their hamstrings and their calves start to like work like crazy. And if they're brave enough, they'll drive one knee towards their chest. So they're basically doing like a single leg, a hamstring bridge or a calf bridge, because everyone wants to feel the glute pump. We're so obsessed with this idea of feel your glutes. But why are we trying to feel our glutes without the rest of the chain? So I
Mm.
want someone to feel their foot, their calf, their hamstring, and their glute working together while staying very minimally off the ground so they're not using their lower back. So we could start to utilize that whole chain. Because when we're hip extending in general, when we push off through the foot, we're not pushing through the heel. We push off through the forefoot. So that's how we want to train hip extension. So that's a great drill that, again, lying on your back, just a foam roller under your feet, put it relatively far away from you, at least 90-degree angle, and drive up through the balls of your feet. And all of a sudden, you're going to feel a completely different sensation, and people's calves and hamstrings really start to cramp up, which is great because I want the whole chain connected better.
That's great. Hey, I reminded me of something I wanted to bring up. This is definitely tangential, but here we go. So you mentioned the soleus being such an important muscle, and
Yes.
there was a bit of research that came out. I can't track time very well, so let's just say in the past, and not that
Mhm.
long ago, where some scientists had put electrical stimulators on people's lower leg so that the calf, the soleus would contract and just over and over and over for hours a day, like 6 hours a day. And one thing they found is the soleus never got sore, never had a problem, could keep going forever. And it made them burn calories like there was no tomorrow.
Hmm.
And so people have been, the reason I'm bringing it up is it's very interesting muscle for that reason. It'll just keep going and going and going. It's the energizer bunny of your muscles.
Yeah.
But then people were saying, oh, I guess all you need to do is like just do calf raises while you're sitting down. No, that was electrically stimulating a muscle beyond what you could naturally do on your
Yeah.
own for hours and hours a day. And there's literally people who made God knows how much money selling little courses. Oh, just do calf raises and lose weight. So I just want to punch myself in the
I
face.
think the isometrics are so important that are so overlooked. So we were talking about just that position of being in a foam roller on your back. That's an iso. The same thing of learning to be stacked and then pressurizing through the knuckles of the foot, the metatarsal heads, and finding your calf in a position like that. And even like coming to the point where your heel just comes a millimeter off the ground again, that all of a sudden starts to create the shakes in people because they're just not used to being in these positions. And then
Yeah.
that starts to become something like more habitual. So isometrics are really important for giving you information, and then you could start getting creative and just reaching in different planes of motion.
Again, maybe I don't know if ironically is the right word for this, but there was a study that came out recently showing just doing an isometric wall sit, just back against the wall,
Yep.
slide down till your thigh is at 90 degrees, is parallel to the ground, and your lower legs are perpendicular to the ground. And that doing that for 2 minutes a day, and by the way, you will not be able to do 2 minutes at one time when you're starting this, and your legs will shake and you'll fall down if you go as hard as you can. But doing that dramatically lowered blood pressure for people,
Hmm.
which I
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
was fascinating.
Very cool.
But we have to start bringing this to, I didn't want to say a close, but we got to wind it up just because of reality. If people want to find out more about what you're up to so they can experience this more, because this is just totally dreamy, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously through all the socials, I'm LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I'm at Ground Up Physio. So the whole idea of ground up and physio. It's funny in the States they call it physical therapy for whatever reason. In Canada
Yeah.
it's physiotherapy, not sure why, but ground up physio is where they could find me. And I also have an online program that's available for people. That's a foot pain program, a back pain program, where I'm basically teaching the exact same exercises that I teach to my clients here in my clinic that empowers them to utilize their whole body. Very simple things that they could do in the comfort of their own home that doesn't really require any equipment, but it's all about reteaching these stacked positions, learning to utilize your body more effectively so everything shows up to the party. So many times when people have knee pain, their knees just getting overloaded, and they'll go to a doctor, and the doctor will say, "You have X-itis." I don't need to give someone a name of what they have. This part just works too much, and the other parts are working a little too little, and let's just redistribute forces. So that's what it is, a simple program that people could do. Again, they could find that through all the links in my bios and all the different channels that are available.
A, that's delightful. B, you made me think of a story. When I got back into sprinting 17 years ago, I was having a bunch of knee pain on my right side. And I went to a doctor, and after the third or fourth session with him that did nothing, he said, "Well, you have patellar tendonitis." And I said, "Yeah, I told you that when I walked in the door 4 sessions ago. I just didn't say it in Latin." And he got really mad at me. But I didn't care because he clearly didn't know what was going on, never asked me how I was running, never looked at how I was running, just was like paying attention to the knee, which was useless at that time because it was not caused by my knee. So
Just a couple questions deeper is like where we have to go with people. It's just like, how are you running? How much are you running? Just go dive into deeper and then
well, they're not going to go there because they don't know anything about analyzing gait
for
properly.
sure.
They're not going to go to a point where it's clear that they're out of their depth. And if you say, "I've been running," and they don't know how to look at you running in slow motion, look at
Mhm.
you in slow motion running, not running in slow motion, then and know what proper running mechanics are, it's good. That's a good slow motion run. Then there's nothing they can offer you. And this is the challenge. So anyway, Greg, this has been a total pleasure. And for everyone else, I do hope you go check out Ground Up Physio. And yeah, it's physiotherapists in Britain too. And I think most of Europe, if they're going to speak English, that's what they say. I don't know how we drop the U in things. We don't use millimeters down here. No one knows what a
Yeah,
millimeter
it's true.
is.
I've been
Yeah,
using
it's all messed up.
metric terms. I apologize for the audience.
Uh, there's an old spoof radio thing. They did a spoof um, weather forecast. It was something like it's 6:48 a.m. right now, which is 9:33 Celsius. And that was like a perfect American thing of not knowing how Celsius works. Anyway, everyone else, go check out what Greg's up to. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And a reminder, go check out www.jointhemovementmovement.com to find previous episodes, other places you can find the podcast if you care about finding other places. You can find us, all of our social media accounts where you can track us on social, watch the video of this, or see us on Facebook and everywhere else that you can find us. And again, most importantly, give us a good 5-star review and a thumbs up. Hit the bell icon on YouTube to get notified about new episodes. Spread the word. And most importantly, just go out, have fun, and live life feet first.